This is the Alt Thinking Podcast by 9 Point Partners. Today, featuring the DeFi Decoded series in partnership with Prophecy DeFi. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of DeFi Decoded. My name is Alex Tapscott. I am the Managing Director of the Digital Asset Group at 9 Point Partners, joined by my co-host, Andrew Young, the co-founder of the SX Network and the CEO of Layer 2 Blockchain. We're taking a bit of a different approach to this week's podcast in light of some pretty big news that's going on in the world that directly affects the DeFi space and the world of digital assets. So we will return to our regular scheduled programming next week, but this is something that we just can't miss. What's happened recently is the big US infrastructure bill, which was proposed by the Biden administration, was very, very close to clearing the Senate and going to vote in the House when a number of people realized that there was a provision inside the final bill called a pay for. And a pay for basically is a provision that says how spending is going to be paid for. So you're going to spend money on bridges. Well, how are you going to pay for it? And this pay for provision claimed it would raise $28 billion in new revenue from the cryptocurrency industry by requiring brokers to provide information on their users and the IRS thus having more information about who has gains and therefore what they can claim. Now, our view, obviously, is that traditional exchanges and brokers, such as Gemini, Coinbase, and others, should be regulated and comply with any new tax laws that are approved by the Congress. And in fact, the CEOs of those companies and others have said as much. However, the provision as it was originally written was quite vague and could potentially have included basically any kind of participant in the industry, from miners to software developers to node operators and others. And if passed in its original form, our view is it would have had a very chilling effect on innovation in DeFi and maybe would have thrown the whole industry into a state of confusion and uncertainty. So it's a pivotal moment for the industry, that's for sure. And at the time of recording right now, there's been yet another update that after various back and forths with amendments and counter amendments, it appears that there is a compromise that has been reached that would basically narrow the definition of a broker to pretty much include those kinds of companies I was just talking about. And there's even a carve out for some of those other areas that I raised, which is amazing, honestly, that this kind of a compromise has been reached. But it was definitely to the final whistle, that's for sure. And it still has not yet been voted on. So things may change between the time of filming this and the time that you view it. But I think the most important thing here is that the whole experience has really sort of revealed a lack of understanding amongst people who, understand the way the financial world has worked historically, who don't fully understand how it may work in the future. Governments and regulators are accustomed to traditional custodial financial companies, companies that hold assets on behalf of others. But we know that DeFi protocols, as we've discussed, are non-custodial. A lot of people interact with them while they still control and hold their assets. Regulators are also used to overseeing companies and individuals, whereas DeFi is built on code and mathematics. So there isn't necessarily, an individual CEO or CFO or a corporation with a head office in the same way that there is in the traditional world as well. So we have to confront these new challenges, and we need to do so in a thoughtful manner. And it would appear, based on where things stand today, as of filming, it's Monday at noon, that we are headed in the right direction. But on this episode of DeFi Decoded, Andrew and I are going to dig into this topic, discussing sort of how we got here, what's at stake, and what the future holds, and whether this battle, such as it is, that looks to have a happy ending, is a preview of some more to come, and whether this is going to be the defining issue really for the next few years. So that's sort of a long-winded introduction, obviously, to this podcast, but happy that you're with us here, and let's get into it. So Andrew, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. This has really been the talk of crypto Twitter and the cryptoverse for the last 4 days. Pretty much no one has spoken or talked about anything else. I think one of the biggest things that's kind of come out of this is that the crypto community has realized that they actually do have a lot of power if everyone sort of bands together and and puts pressure on the senators in terms of making calls and lobbying and stuff like that. But honestly, I think your experience in speaking with both crypto businesses and regulators around the world during your global speaking tour sort of makes you one of the best people in the world, I think, to speak on this subject. So I think it'd be really beneficial for our listeners if I just ask you a bunch of questions on the topic.
Okay. Sure.
And see and go from there. I think, namely, really the first thing that everyone sort of wants to know is, what impact would this have on DeFi, both globally and in the US, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, it remains to be seen what the final language is that it looks like. But if it turns out that the government in this law takes an overly broad or overly vague definition of what a broker is, then it could effectively imperil a lot of people who are not acting as brokers at all. Those who are acting as a node operator in a network, or a validator in a proof of stake system. I mean, you and I and Layer 2 and plenty of other people own proof of stake assets that they assign to validators that help to support those networks. Does that mean that I'm a broker? I mean, I'm just an individual, and I don't know anything about the people who maybe have transactions in a block that I help to validate because I happen to stake my coins, right? So these are the kinds of funny, bizarre things that could occur if that happens. And I think, honestly, it would just make the law very confusing and very unworkable. And I think it would have a chilling effect if it was implemented using that kind of a language. And I think it would potentially cause a lot of projects and individuals to move more offshore from the United States. And I think that was actually one of the main concerns that I think kind of cut through partisan divides and helped to really clarify this issue, which is that this is a $2 trillion asset class. It's a big industry. We're seeing the kinds of exponential adoption curves in DeFi that we saw in the internet in the 1990s. And I think a lot of senators and a lot of smart people, these are smart people, they're just a little misinformed about a new and emerging technology, finally understood that there was actually a huge economic prize at stake here. And they decided to take a softer approach. Again, I don't know how it's going to play out exactly. We may have to do an addendum to this episode when we launch it, but it definitely would have a chilling effect on innovation. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, I think, and you brought up a really good point about the how they were originally proposing to make proof of stake validators brokers, but it actually didn't include proof of work miners.
Yeah.
So it was, in a weird way, it was a government sanctioned monopoly given to proof of work miners and proof of work systems versus proof of stake, which is bizarre because proof of work is obviously much more energy intensive and doesn't really fit with the green focused, intentions of the Democrat side that has sort of been pushing this. And actually,
it seemed at odds with that objective. That's for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely pretty odd. And one thing I also just want to add to your points, which I totally agree with. I think one other thing that could be interesting is that it could force developers and other participants within the industry to sort of change their technology in kind of bizarre ways to fit these new laws. I think the Cosmos co-founder, Ethan Buchman, actually had a great point. He was like, if proof of work is allowed, but proof of stake isn't allowed, what might happen is that proof of stake developers will just add trivial amounts of proof of work into the proof of stake consensus mechanism. And therefore it would be classified as a proof of work system and therefore fine, which from a technical perspective makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's just
pointless, right? It's just a pointless addition that would have no, impact on the protocol, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And another thing that was interesting is that, not to get too bogged into the details of this, but they actually had an amendment that then included proof of stake with proof of work. And then these other projects got really mad because there's actually tens and it's up to 20 other different types of consensus mechanisms besides proof of work and proof of stake.
Yeah.
They're much smaller, but proof of storage, there's all sorts of other things. And it was just weird. You get weird things when the government sort of picks winners and losers.
Well, I think that's an interesting point, right? So the main accusation was, oh, okay, sorry, we didn't mean miners. So we're going to say in the law, this excludes proof of work miners. And then everyone said, well, wait, there are all these other networks that use a different system to validate transactions. And so they said, oh, sorry. So they added proof of stake. And it's like, well, no, there are actually others. And I think the thing that advocates were really looking for was not for the government to pick winners, but just to be technology neutral. to basically clarify if the meaning of the law was to include brokers who are, acting on behalf of others and getting paid for it, then that's what it should say. And it seems like that's what we're ending up with in the final language. I think the whole process has revealed this kind of classic dichotomy, which is, are we talking about malice or ignorance here? Do people put proof of work in because there's a bunch of Bitcoin maximalists in the Senate? Like, no, of course not. They don't know what they're talking about. The issue was not that they wanted proof of work to succeed over others per se, but that they didn't really realize what was going on in the industry. And it's a reminder of the risks of regulating things when you don't fully understand them or when you're a little too early. I think now is a suitable time to start clarifying a lot of these rules, just to be clear. And I think regulations and regulators are a necessary part of the world we live in, and they're not going away. But there is some examples throughout history where things could have gone awry, and in fact, where they did. So in the early days of the automobile, in the United Kingdom, they introduced these things called red flag laws, which basically required anybody who owned a vehicle to have both a driver, but also a red flag man. And this was someone who would walk in front of the car waving a red flag. And the reason for that is that they didn't want to scare horses or pedestrians with this newfangled invention. Sort of reminds me of, not scaring traditional banks with the wild, wild world of DeFi. Of course, the fact that there was someone with a red flag walking in front of the car sort of defeated the purpose of the car, which was to get around quickly and have autonomy. And I worry about rules being put in place today that could have a similar chilling effect on innovation. And some people actually argue that the red flag laws in the UK are one of the reasons why the UK ceded some early leadership in automobile production to the United States, right? Because they have regulations which stifled innovation. Another example of this is in the 1990s. There was a proposal for anybody who created or hosted a website to get a CB radio license. So, there were only a few hundred or thousand of those available. Imagine what impact that would have had on the spread of the internet if every single person that wanted to launch a website had to first, get a limited issue license from the government. So there's examples. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And actually, the experience of the internet is instructive. During the 1990s, the government revised the Telecommunications Act to ensure that internet service providers wouldn't be held legally liable for the content that were on websites that they happened to host, right? So someone reposts a copyrighted image from Disney, you can't hold the ISP responsible. This is actually a pretty good analogy to what we're dealing with today, right? It's like, okay, someone didn't pay their taxes on a investment that they made in some token, and we're not going to go after the proof of stake miner or the proof of work miner because they happen to be involved in validating that transaction. That's ridiculous, right? So I think if we bring the same kind of insight and thoughtfulness that we brought to the internet discussion in the 90s to the crypto discussion today, I think we're going to have a winning formula. I think the fact that this was done as sort of a last minute thing that was tried to jam into a totally unrelated bill is where we all got off on the wrong foot. If we're going to really think about how to regulate and govern this new technology, it needs to be deliberative process. It has to have hearings. There needs to be open discussion. You need to have feedback from people and experts. It needs to be done in the right way. So hopefully, if anything, this experience has taught us that that's the direction that we should be going.
Yeah, no, totally. I totally agree with everything you said there. I think you brought up a good point too. Like for proof of stake miners, or I guess validators, or a Bitcoin full node, it's pretty much impossible for them to even comply with this law as it was originally written, because they can't find all the identities of the parties transacting on a block that they helped secure. So it sort of betrays the basic understanding of how these systems work.
Well said. Yeah,
and you brought up a good point with the ISPs. It's very similar to that. I guess one counterpoint is the cryptocurrency industry. How do you think it should be taxed if the issue is raising taxes for this infrastructure bill? Shouldn't everyone pay their fair share?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, the infrastructure bill is hundreds of billions of dollars, and the only pay for in the whole bill is for the cryptocurrency industry. And they never actually explained where they get the 28 billion from. What is that number? Is that their estimation of taxes that should have been paid that haven't? Is it based on some growth estimate. There's been no data that's been provided. So for starters, I think that the pay for provision had lots of flaws. Of course, anybody who owes taxes where they live should pay them in full. That goes without saying. But as you pointed out, the law itself wouldn't have really helped in that respect, because there's no way for someone who is a cog in a vast machine of a proof of work or even a proof of stake system, or someone who's a software developer who happened to build an application that allows you to interact with some DeFi protocol. None of that helps, because those people, as you pointed out, can't get that information. There's no way for them to comply. So that was the fundamental flaw. It wasn't like, oh, you're trying to get people to pay taxes that maybe they shouldn't pay taxes. It's no, this isn't going to help the end goal, because these are entities which cannot comply because of the way in which the language confuses the way in which this system works. Obviously, everybody who has to pay taxes in an area for whatever reason should be paying those taxes. That's not something that I think should be in dispute at this point.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I guess the natural question too is, who stands to benefit from this in the cryptoverse? Would this we sort of talked about the offshoring of DeFi projects from the US, but and how proof of work sort of gets some benefit from it. But I guess from your mind, who would actually benefit from this law?
It's an interesting point. What's been really kind of revealing about this whole process to me is that throughout all of the ups and downs and changes and uncertainty of this past 7 or 8 days of debate, the price of Bitcoin, the leading proof of work coin, and the price of Ethereum, still proof of work, but sort of on its way, whatever, and the leading DeFi protocol, leading protocol for DeFi, have both been going up in value, right? So, in the end, the market is the weighing machine for whether things are important. And probably what the market was telling you is that DeFi and Bitcoin will be just fine, regardless of the outcome. But it could be that the US stands to lose, right? If there is an offshoring of talent and wealth and jobs and other economic opportunities. So I do believe that on the margin, having the United States, the largest common market and the leading innovation economy in the world, having rules that are supportive of DeFi and crypto is probably a good thing. So I think that the whole sector stands to benefit as a result. And I'll point out too that I think it's probably more, it's better for DeFi, mostly because when something is early stage, it's still fragile, and if things go wrong, it can be crushed, right? But when something is as big as an elephant, and has this sort of unstoppable momentum, I don't think that something like this could stop it. I'm referring to Bitcoin in this respect. So I think probably DeFi benefits more just because it's more early stage, but I think it's clearly better for, it's good for everybody. And I will point out that, in the remarks that one of the senators made who supported this new compromise, they talked explicitly about how Bitcoin mining was offshored from China, mostly because, and they point out, because China doesn't want the competition for their digital yuan, and how the US could stand to benefit from that. So clearly the proponents in government are thinking beyond taxes. They're thinking strategically about why these industries are and could be more important to the US economy.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. I guess my last question really is depending on how this all pans out, obviously there's still a lot up in the air. Do you see this as a cautionary tale for other countries looking to sort of regulate and legislate on crypto? Or I guess, given how things have sort of been swinging back and forth, and it looks like we sort of got some good news recently this morning. I guess, yeah, that's really my question is, do you see this as a cautionary tale for other countries?
Well, the outcome here might still be positive in terms of where we land on the amended language. And I think it can still be a cautionary tale. And the cautionary tale is about how we do policy. This is big, important stuff that we need to get right. We are going to create the new rules of the road for the financial services industry of the future. That's kind of an important thing. And it shouldn't be done as a last minute provision in an otherwise unrelated bill, right? It should be done in a thoughtful manner. So I do hope that countries that want to be involved in this innovation and benefit from the growth that it could enable, that they take a different approach. And, you and I are in Canada, obviously, look at all this cedar that we're surrounded by, the both of us. For those who are listening on audio, we're both at cottages, which are basically buildings in the woods. And I think that countries like Canada could stand to benefit from just being leaders in clarifying how these things ought to be treated. And I think that that's an opportunity that they should try and seize. So I do think it's a cautionary tale for that reason.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I totally agree as well. I think one of the things that's actually gave me the most hope from all of this was the fact that the crypto community sort of all collectively got together and put pressure on the U.S. senators. I believe there was over 20,000 calls made to U.S. senators in the last 4 days about this topic, and it was entirely organized through, I guess, relatively decentralized through Twitter, or crypto Twitter as we call it. And it's kind of interesting. There is now kind of talks of the crypto community setting up sort of single issue super PACs to sort of help fund candidates that are pro crypto. I think that's kind of one of the most interesting things, is that the crypto community has realized that we need to play in this game and sort of put our weight behind it. So
well, it's like it's like a teenager who wakes up and realizes that they can bench press 250 pounds. They didn't know that before. They sort of woke up to their own strength. Maybe that's an experience that you had at some point, Andrew. I remember certainly when that happened to me. So it's one of those things where, like, oh my gosh, we actually have real clout, we have real power, and look what happens when we're not all pulling in different directions. Look what happens when we're all in this together, right? So there's still lots of factionalism, and there should be lots of healthy competition between crypto protocols. That's how we get to the promised land, I think, is through competition, and that's great. But when it comes to this this new world of government advocacy and policy making, I think a united voice with some common messaging and organization is really helpful. I mean, look what happened through this decentralized grassroots effort. Imagine what happens when there's real when there's more organization and initiative behind it. I think it could be quite a powerful force in government for years to come.
For sure. Well, awesome. I think that sort of wraps up all the questions I had, and I don't know if you have anything else to say, but this has been super insightful just for me, just to learn more about the regulation process and how it affects DeFi. So yeah, thank you for answering all these questions.
Yeah, and for our listeners and our viewers who are catching this on YouTube, we're going to get back to talking about DeFi protocols and what they do and why we're excited about them. But the fact is that governments and regulators are important stakeholders in the financial industry, and sometimes you have to talk about them and how all this stuff works to get back to the technology. So looking forward to digging into that next week when we reconvene. All right. Well, that concludes this week's episode of DeFi Decoded. We will see you next week. Take care, everyone.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.